tune in, they bring you the truth, yeah they do. Stories deep and shining through the details, here to break it down.
Tom Kitchen here. Don't worry, that's not our new theme tune. That's just a song I created with AI music generator Udio when I asked it to come up with, quote, a song about New Zealand podcast The Detail.
From the peaks of Fjordland to Auckland town, they dive into the stories, uncover what's around, the details on a mission to the heart of our ground.
Okay, I think we've heard enough of that. These AI music generation platforms are new. One of the big ones popped up at the end of 2023, and another at the beginning of this year. And the pace of change has caused serious debate.
2 decades after music piracy threatened the music industry, it's facing another reckoning as music labels and artists decide whether to embrace the new tech or risk being left behind.
In Australia, screen composers have told a Senate Select Committee that they want laws to ensure their industry is enhanced by AI rather than replaced by it.
Some musicians are weighing in on the conversation. Here's Neo.
I look at AI the way I look at fire, right? Now, with fire, you can warm a home, you can create a beautiful home-cooked meal, but you can also burn a house down with fire. So it's not necessarily that it's a bad thing, it's a bad thing depending on how it's being used.
And Grimes.
You know, artificial intelligence will eventually render us obsolete. I don't think they'll do it in a malicious way, but I think probably we are very weak.
Today, we'll find out about how AI music works, the upsides to it, and the concerns. And we'll do a little bit more platform testing. I have with me RNZ operator extraordinaire, if you want to call yourself that. Rangi Poet, kia ora, welcome to The Detail.
Kia ora, Tom. You called me that, not myself.
What would you call yourself?
No, I'm a senior studio operator and recording engineer at RNZ.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. First time on The Detail, actually being
pleasure.
on this side of the mic?
Yeah, worked on The Detail since its start, but this first time I've actually appeared as a guest.
Hey, well, what do you know? Look, thank you for joining us. We've got you on because we've heard through the grapevine you're a bit of an expert in the AI music field. Would you call yourself that too?
I'm noodling around with it. I'm curious, like a lot of people, with this whole kind of explosion in AI-generated music. It makes content generation, music creation really easy. Like, you actually don't have to have any talent at all, I think, because the artificial intelligence creates it all for you.
That's your intelligence, yeah.
It is, I guess, just for the average person who's interested in having a play with it. It's fun. It's quick and easy to generate interesting and fairly catchy music.
Well, shall we have a go at creating some fun, catchy music, shall we? So we're here in the RNZ studio here in Auckland, and we've got the website Suno on our computer, right? So tell me a bit about Suno, Rangi.
Suno is one of several websites that have popped up recently, and it was the first one that I came across. Essentially, it's just a website with a dialog box you can put text into, and you hit the create button, give it a prompt of what you want, and the AI creates different versions of a song based on that one text prompt. All
right, well, let's give it a bit of a text prompt, shall we, and see what we feel like creating. Rangi, it's totally up to you today. What do you feel like creating? What's the vibe that you want to go for today?
Well, let's keep it simple. Since we're doing the Detail, I thought I'm literally just going to find the Detail website, the RNZ Detail website, and pinch a bunch of text from there and see what kind of song AI will generate around the theme of the Detail podcast.
All right, go ahead.
Not doing any original creative content myself here. I'm literally just copying and pasting some text from another website and pasting it into the prompt in Suno. We just tweaked it a little bit and added some of the names of the Detail crew in there just to make it a bit more interesting and a bit more personal, I think. Down to you now, Tom. What kind of music would you like to hear? What style of music? What genre?
Let's do something rock and roll, shall we?
rock and roll.
Why not?
Like to just put in the front, create a rock and roll song about the detail, and then the text is all the same.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens. We'll hit the big create button,
All right.
which usually takes, it's not very long. It's less than a minute.
So we've come up with 60s styled rock and roll. This song is called Podcast Roll. We did not come up with that title. But yeah, let's take a listen to the song that we created about the detail with Suno.
Tom with his notes and a fire in his eyes. Alexis chasing leads under darkened skies. Sharon's got the scoop, she's never gonna lie. When and Davina in the echo of the cry.
Right, so more country than rock and roll. And pretty self-indulgent too.
When and Davina breaking through the line. Country's best journalist, right on time. It makes sense of the chaos in the daily grind.
Later in the podcast, we'll come back to another track Rangi and AI put together for us. But first...
When people say it's a revolution as big as electricity or the motor car, then they're not exaggerating it. They're really not.
That's Ollie Bowen, an associate professor at the University of New South Wales School of Art and Design. He researches AI in creative industries, particularly music.
The reason that this is all over the news is that over the last 10 or more years, there's been this relentless surge of sort of progress, in quote marks, technical advance in the capability of AI systems. The most obvious evidence of that is in the language model stuff, so GPT and those AI language models, because they are so startlingly sort of lifelike and human-like in their response and in their ability to sort of do basic logic. I think it's sort of obvious to anyone that there's something pretty clever happening there. The question, on everyone's minds is how clever, like how far is this going to go? Like these systems have really blatant flaws, but they also are startling in their capability. And in music, we've got what's happened is similar kinds of models. And the big thing about these models is they're all trained on huge amounts of data. That's the key, that they work at scale and they develop their capability by being trained on masses and masses of data. And in music, we've got quite surprisingly, I think even to the experts, now these systems that are able to produce original material at an audio level, which means that it's literally building sample by sample the audio waveform, and then it's building that so it can simulate acoustic sounds, instrumental sounds, electronic sounds, voices, and also the musical structure and even the long-term musical form that makes up a song. All of that's starting to be really successfully captured in AI.
So there's a couple of platforms that have been released this year which have really kind of boosted the role of AI in music, right? What are those platforms?
Well, the two that have really made the news have been a pair of companies called Suno and Udio. I actually have no idea if I'm pronouncing that the way they intend.
No, well, that's how I'd pronounce it.
Like the word audio, but with the A removed. So Suno and Udio, and they're very, very similar in their sort of construction. So there's been a lot of progress in these text to audio models, right? So it's an AI generator. You can give it a description and it will output a piece of audio that bears some association with that description. And people are quite familiar with this in image generation. For a few years now, we've had DALL-E and Stable Diffusion and Midjourney are the three most well-known AI image generators, and they've been disrupting the graphics industry. We're getting there with video, and music's come along at quite a pace in the last year. So lots of people made those innovations, but Suno and Udio they're both startups that have managed to turn those into quite nicely designed websites that allow you to just jump on, create an account, and start generating. And what they both do very well is they integrate lyric generation and then the singing, the rendering of those lyrics into song with the music generation, all integrated into one big black box, which is a phenomenal feat. So on the one hand, you've got expert musicologists and musicians sort of saying these sound very derivative, they're very simplistic, they don't have some of the important qualities of musical expression. And in addition, they've been trained on lots of music that nobody gave permission for these systems to use that music to train on. That's a very tricky debate. On the other hand, if you just sit down and listen to these things, they are remarkably impressive. So even if they're not musically cutting the mustard for expert musicologists, they give people those little jolts of joy that you get from an amazing piece of musical structure.
They obviously have a big database, as you talk about, where they kind of get all their music from, all the ideas. I mean, where is that?
Well, any company can get access to songs in various ways. I mean, as a researcher 15 years ago in a lab that was doing sort of music AI experiments, people just had a hard drive of stuff they downloaded and they'd pass it around. And that was in the day when this was all very naive. There was no megabucks outcome of that research, whereas nowadays this is all being scrutinized very heavily. But I mean, the company may have paid for a massive music data set, but if you're a smart programmer, you can write a script that pulls songs down, from YouTube. The simplest case, you could just set it on record and have it listen to Spotify or something. But the challenge actually is not just to get the music, because that's only one half of the data set. The data set is music plus the text that describes the music.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you something about that. I put in, Udio, write a song about the detail of New Zealand podcast, and it came up with references to Auckland, references to Fiordland, two different parts of New Zealand, without me even telling about it. So, where would they get that from?
So I don't actually know the technical details of how those systems are structured in their finer design, but I believe that they're integrating a standard large language model. So one of the things that's happening in the wake of all of these innovations in the core AI is people coming up with clever ways to integrate a powerful language model with a text to audio model. So a standard thing you might do is the user types in their prompt, like you asked for podcasts about New Zealand. It goes into the language model to generate some lyrics, and that's just entirely language generation. And then those lyrics are aligned with the music generation, which is also probably driven by a pre-processing stage. So you said, podcast New Zealand, maybe you put in a genre term, maybe you didn't.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah, well, it might then infer from you mentioning New Zealand that it should be, whatever music is popular or typical of New Zealand.
Oh, I think it came up with ambient, electronic or something like that.
Well, there you go. It's a huge scene in New Zealand, right?
Yeah. I guess, going over the mountains and the fjords and the lakes of New Zealand makes it ambient and, I don't know, something like that.
It could do that. I mean, the language models, they do lots of things terribly wrong. They make things up and make mistakes, but they're very good at associative reasoning. So you talk about New Zealand, there's an association to beautiful landscapes, and then there's an association to, cinematic ambient music.
In case you need a reminder of that example, here's a bit more of that song we played at the start.
The detail paints the truth, no disguise. From Maori legends to cities glow, every thread gets woven, stories flow.
I'm still in a state of sort of shock over the last couple of years at how quickly those models have blown everything else out of the water. I mean, I've worked in this area for a long time, and in academic conferences, we'd spend a lot of time sitting and listening to quite painful melodic generations that didn't sound very listenable. And then all of a sudden, in a 5-year period, we're listening to sort of, virtuosic guitar solos with incredible timbral nuances, incredible gesture, overlaid over really interesting chord structures, and it's all just kind of churning out of these models.
Okay, maybe not that one about the detail. Here's an example of what he's talking about.
Can we talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of this, right? So what would you say would be the advantages of having a system like this, where people can just, type in a few words and get a great new song out of it?
It very much depends on what you're trying to do musically. There's a million different creative activities that musicians might be involved in. Say you're a hip hop producer and you're looking for a kind of hook to put some beats over and then rap over, you can have a great deal of fun with this because you're already in that mindset of sampling, of lifting existing music and sort of reinterpreting it. And this just gives you a kind of huge playground of sounds and timbres and musical styles. So if you're in that more sort of sampling culture, then this type of system is incredibly natural to you. And a lot of electronic music producers would be doing that. You might also be, say, say a school teacher or someone who does music for, a fun open mic night once a week. You want interesting backing material, and you might have a great deal of fun just sort of getting a backing track that you can sing over or play over. A lot of professional producers will use this stuff, but there's a very interesting sort of limitation about the level of control you have. And if you don't have control, it's maybe of a bit more limited use. So an example would be if you wanted to use one of these tools just to get you a great saxophone solo that goes over your track that you've made. That's still something that is hard to sort of coerce and control the system to do. There are and there will be more and more sort of dedicated AI products for doing all of these different specific things. I mean, another one is voice.
Here's an example of that. Ozzy Osbourne's son, Jack, is playing an AI version of Ozzy singing another artist's song.
That's a Shania Twain song, Still the One, and that's someone did an AI version of you singing it.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. It cuts out the bug. You can't undo it. The danger is people will misuse it.
The big fear from artists is all about intellectual property and copyright. In the US, the Artists' Rights Alliance wrote to AI companies about it.
More than 200 artists, including Nicki Minaj, Noah Kahan, and the estates of Bob Marley and Frank Sinatra, are standing against what they call its unchecked usage. An open letter posted Monday by the Artists' Right Alliance nonprofit acknowledges the creative potential of AI, but calls on developers, tech companies, and platforms to stop using it to infringe upon and devalue the rights of human artists.
Back to Ollie.
So the copyright issue is really complicated, and it's complicated because copyright law has just not been set up to account for this particular situation. What the AI systems generate may very often sound very similar to something you've heard before, but not identical. And it may be really blatantly in the style of a certain musician or visual artist in the case of image generation. I mean, you'd think that somebody's style is the thing that's most valuable to, their artistic capital really embedded in the fact that you've spent years practicing and developing and nurturing an individual style, and that should be the thing that's protected. But actually it never is. In copyright law, generally the thing that's protected is a specific piece of work. So that's what's being debated at the moment in a particular case of visual generation. A group of artists, including cartoonists and illustrators, are trying to sue Stability AI, who make the Stable Diffusion image generator, and Midjourney.
They claim that their art was used to train these models without consent or compensation, and now it can create very convincing replicas of these individual creators. As such, they are seeking financial compensation for the lost revenue.
They can provide evidence that you can go into Stable Diffusion and you can type image in the style of artist X, and it will give you something that's clearly in that artist's style. And yet copyright law doesn't actually stop someone doing that. There are other laws and other moral rights that can restrict what you do with that work. But the question is actually whether the AI companies have broken any law by gathering all of that data in the first place and feeding it into their model. And it's hard to really pin down exactly what law they've broken. What is clear, though, is that their main defense is that there's this thing called a fair use exemption, which says that people training AI are allowed to train their AI on copyrighted material without breaking the law. But that comes with this expectation that that's not in a commercial context, and it's not impacting and disrupting the very people whose work they've created. So it seems really clear to me that those companies are breaking that trust and that basic principle by trying to use this fair use exemption.
Is that kind of law internationally recognised?
It's different for everywhere. I mean, obviously the place where everyone's looking is the US. And in the US, they have these exemptions, but the exemptions are with those caveats. So you're allowed to train your AI model on anything you can get your hands on, as long as you're not competing in the same market with the people whose data you've borrowed, stolen, whatever.
So that's the current debate. Now, what does Ollie think about the future of AI music generation?
I do think that, say, live music continues to be live music, and music enjoyment will still involve listening to your favorite artists, a human being who made music. They might have used AI in various ways. But what we'll see at the same time, though, is the music markets change quite substantially. And that's always been the problem for musical artists, is there's some expectation of getting revenue from selling records. People will still want to listen to your records, but when we go on TikTok, when we're listening to TV adverts, all of those ways that music appears in our lives, which we don't necessarily choose, those big markets will be shifted in massive ways. And the obvious thing is that it just reduces the cost of production. And if you're a TV producer and you're looking to get a piece of music and you want it fast and you want it cheap, this is clearly going to transform how you get your music.
Yeah, take out the middleman. You don't have to pay musicians. 5 minutes later, you got a perfect track.
Yep.
I'm back here with Rangi. Hey, Rangi.
Hey.
We tried a little bit of 60s rock and roll, which turned into a little bit of country, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But now we're just going a little bit different, a little bit of a different vibe. We're going to try a different genre. What have we decided to try?
Yeah, so we're going to kind of try and create something that's the complete kind of opposite of that. So we're going with 80s hip-hop, using the exact same text prompt, so it'll be a track about the detail and the detail team, in the style of 80s hip-hop. So you should see that, the kind of text or the lyric content of the song will be similar, just transplanted to a different genre vibe.
So let's click create and see what we can find, Rangi.
The wheels are spinning.
Taking its time. So this is coming up with a title for our track called The Detail Crew, funky 80s hip-hop.
All right.
Exciting.
We're the Detail Crew, bringing news out the blue, making sense of the story just for you. With Tom, Alexia, Sharon, Gwen, and Davina too. Every day, every week, our passion shines through. We're the Detail Crew, bringing news out the blue, making sense of the story just for you. With Tom, Alexia, Sharon, Gwen, and Davina too. Every day, every week, our passion shines through.
What about that for a theme tune? That's it for the week. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Today's episode was engineered by Phil Bench and produced by Gwen McClure and Alexia Russell. Thanks to Ollie Bowen and Rangi Poick. I'm Tom Kitchen, and this is my last episode of The Detail. Thanks for listening. E nohora.
Every week, our passion shines through.